Hello, everybody. It's been quite some time since I've been able to make a live. Good evening or good morning, wherever you're at on this crazy world. And thank you for tuning in. Today we do have a really special guest named Jan. He runs the Nahuatl Channel. And before I introduce Jan, before he introduces himself, uh, I just want to give a few seconds to thank the first responders because today is 9/11. If you have family or friends or anyone that's watching, thank you to first responders, those in that are policemen in the military, anyone that just makes those meaningful contributions to society. Thank you for all you do, and the firemen too. Thank you. So, yeah, now that we have that aside, again, thank you everyone that we're tuning in right now tonight. And Jan, I'm gonna give the floor to you. Maybe introduce yourself and maybe who you are and what you do, and maybe a little bit about your channel, please.
Sure thing. Piali everyone. Piali na chimitlan. Techkaki naman sin pani nesentilis. Hello everyone. My name is Jan. I'm a linguist by linguist by trade, but I'm a speech language pathologist as well as in my daily work. But related to now, what I do a lot is I promote the language. So I try to work with language activists and language teachers to create classes, to create materials, and to spread basically make the learning of Nahuatl and to make it more accessible to people basically. So it's part of the language revitalization and promotion kind of movement.
I think that's great, Jan, that you do that. I saw you have a lot of followers on your YouTube channel, so I'm sure you've really been able to help a lot of people out that have been wanting to learn. Um, I guess my first question was, how long have you been? When did you start learning Nahuatl, and what made you want to really get into learning, picking up the language, and I guess wanting to, educate others and tell other people about it as well?
Yeah, for sure. I'm a family from Mexican uh, uh, migrants who had come over in the 80s from Jalisco, Mexico, from the Tequesha region. It's a type of Chichimec kind of people. And so growing up, I kind of always knew, understood that Mexican was just a nationality, right? But that within Mexico itself, it's a large country with different groups of people and lots of different individuals that have lots of different um, native ancestry, right? So I was always curious about my own ancestry and kind of recreating that family tree and going back to where we were and that's where I began to see how many of our towns in our area were written in Nahuatl, how much there are documents in our area written in Nahuatl, and so it just seemed like Nahuatl was the way to go. Of all the indigenous languages that we over 64 different native languages, that's an area that I just saw really to have a lot of interest in. So it was 2009. I was a freshman in college when I saw an announcement for a class in Nahuatl, and it was an intensive summer class, and it was held in Mexico, in the state of Zacatecas, in the city of Zacatecas as well. And yeah, so I signed up, convinced my parents to help support me to get over there and support me financially for the moment as a broke college student. And they were very, I had their full support, and so I was able to learn so much of the language in one summer, but not enough to be as fluent as I wanted to be. So over that summer, I would when I came back to the United States, obviously, to continue my studies, and then I just with the little bit that I knew, I was able to start giving workshops already. So I started doing just a few workshops here and there. I was involved with Mecha, it's a nationwide Chicano organization, and I knew that that would be the primary audience and area where there'd be a lot of interest for this language. I went back to study this time with the scholarship that I got through the program. And the program is called EDS, by the way, if anyone is interested in it, in IDIEZ. And it's been many years since then. So the program has evolved, and it looks a little bit differently now. And it's held in the United States, probably somewhere on the East Coast, or towards the East Coast, I want to say. Um, and yeah, so I went to study through that program, and by the time I came back, that was now the summer of 2010. I was much more fluent. I was able to have conversations at that point. But coming back to the United States, you know, I had that difficult problem of finding someone who I would be able to speak the language with. So one way I kind of was able to keep it in my mind is by doing more workshops. I started doing way more workshops and getting much more involved in Mecha to do workshops at different conferences, and the turnout for these things were huge, right? And it was we would be requested, and without having to do any publicity, people would just look for us and call me, and then other people who had graduated from the program who had also uh, uh, got involved at that time. One by the name of Arnold, another by the name of Miguel, and Abel. And then eventually we held a actual like course, right? So workshop is when you're just having like a 1 day kind of introduction to the language, kind of get everyone's feet wet. But we do some very interesting kind of techniques in teaching the language, where we do it by immersion, but but it's very structured. So we have a plan of what grammar we're going to teach, and then we teach that grammar, but we don't just say, "Oh, you conjugate this by adding this, and then the pronoun is this," right? That's boring, and no one talks like that, and most people don't know how to learn from that. So we try to this is a method with which I was taught as well, and so it's very dynamic. Methods like total physical response which is one of the names for this style, and so we turned that workshop and eventually created a full class that is like a group of people where we would meet together every week for, I think it was like maybe 10 weeks that we had in length. And so over that period of time, we saw people go from having no exposure to the language to being able to have like go up to like the advanced beginner kind of levels from just a short class. Um, and so we did that, and we held that in Santa Ana, and then we evolved into having a class in Los Angeles. So someone who attended the class, asked me to do a workshop, and I was like, okay, sure, we'll do a workshop. And it was going to be at a park, and he had connections, so he called up a local public radio, and so the radio called me, so I could give the announcement, and so they made that announcement on radio. And when we showed up to the park, we had like close to 50 people who had shown up to this class. And so yeah, it was a great class, awesome energy, full of people who have this desire to get in touch with their roots and their ancestor language, um, and finally having a means to do that, right? Because there's so many barriers to be able to learn indigenous languages. It's insane how many there are for how many speakers there are, right? 2 million speakers of Nahuatl, and yet you'll find more online resources for smaller languages than that, but that are like out in Europe, for example. They'll have full-length movies in those languages. So we just have so many hurdles that we need to get through. So that's part of what we've been trying to do. We started this online class, and so that group is called Tlahtol Tapasoli, which means language nest. Um, and so it's kind of modeling the name we're modeling after the language revitalization that the Maori people are doing, although theirs is a different technique, which I really like as well, which is more focused on daycare centers that teach children the language, which is another idea which I think would be awesome to be able to run. And we have had one of my students who's now a teacher, Kui. He's run some of those small programs as well, um, and he's run some of those in the past. So teaching Nahuatl to young kids. So that's a whole another dynamic that's very interesting. So yeah, we've just been all over the place trying to create resources here and there. Over the past 2 years, I have been more involved with my family and less involved with the organization that's happening in Los Angeles. So my commitment now is a little bit limited, to be honest. But another modality of teaching the language has been that YouTube channel, so the Nahuatl Channel, which I actually started in Spanish first, way before I started an English one. So that's Canal Nahuatl in Spanish. And I started that many years before I even did an English one. And that one actually still, even though I haven't published on that one actually has more subscribers, and that one has more of an audience from Mexico, whereas this one has more of an audience from the United States, because one's in English and one's in Spanish, but they're very similar kind of materials. I've just uh, updated more of the English one more in the recent years. And yeah, that's some of the random things that we get into.
Wow, that's an amazing story, Jan. Thank you for sharing that with us. I guess my first question to that is, you said that you had to maybe talk with your parents about, supporting you, right? Were they initially hesitant, or were they just kind of curious, or at first maybe it just took some time? Because I know with, I think in the past, like with other people that I've talked to that are of like Mexican descent, native um, descent, who really want to get in touch with their roots. Sometimes I think there's there's obstacles in the way, and I think that those external obstacles, I guess you could call them, would be either friends or family that may in some way inadvertently or maybe just discourage it, right? Um, and I'm not sure. No, I think I do know where that comes from.
Hmm.
But I think it's an unfortunate issue that happens with people that really want to connect or learn more about their ancestry, right? Of these lands. So, yeah, I guess if you don't mind me asking, did it take some time, or were your parents, did they eventually come on board and be like, yeah, okay, this sounds great?
There's a lot of factors I think involved. Um, One thing that helped promote it, I think, is knowing that it's like through a reputable. I was going through a reputable university, and this university also had ties with Yale, so I was able to like do some name calling and use that to my advantage. Not just me just going out there into like a community.
Sure.
Um, I think more the concern was like, oh, why Mexico's kind of a hot spot right now for violence. Actually, it's worse now than it was back then. That's part of the reason why they stopped having the classes in that city of Zacatecas. Um, but in more of that, the insecurity that you have in terms of you physical security, it was one of their biggest concerns rather than the language itself. So I had pretty supportive parents, but there's always a spectrum. Of course, my dad was the one who kind of is a great storyteller. So since I was little, he would. There's many Mexican parents that are very shy and don't have any communication with their kids, and so the kids don't really know much about those parents. And I see this a lot sometimes with indigenous cultures and indigenous parents, depending on depending on the background. Not everyone's the same, but there are some parents where I'll talk to the parents and ask them questions, and then the kids will be like, "Oh, I didn't even know that about my parents." Um, and because some parents are just a very closed book and don't really talk about their prior experiences and don't share the knowledge that they do have, like plant knowledge or animal knowledge and things like that, or vocabulary that's unique to their hometown. Because there's a lot of that in Mexico too, like unique towns that have unique words that come from the local native language. Um, yeah, so there's a whole bunch of factors involved, and I'm jumping around a little bit, but of course, there I would have encountered like a neighbor lady who would be like, "Oh, you're studying indigenous language? What's that for? What's that? How's that gonna serve you?" Or, "Oh, that's cute that you like that kind of thing." But they'll kind of like put you down in that kind of sense, you know. But I mean, I'm not the kind of person who lets people's inaccurate opinions bog me down. Deep inside, I know what the truth is, and I know not to put like these labels, these negative labels onto something that's common sense background. I understood racism from a very young age. I was, none of these things were not these things were just common sense to me as a little kid. So whenever I'd hear grown ups say ignorant kind of comments like that, I'd just be like, well, I could just, it wouldn't bother me. It'd just be like, oh, that's that person, and they have that point of view, and I know where it comes from, but I don't accept it. Um, but ultimately, yeah, and I have a lot of uncles who are very supportive, and they'll tell, and it became a thing where that's kind of like their thing. Sometimes parents like to show off whatever they can about their kids, and they'll be like, "Oh, my son speaks Nahuatl." And so whenever we see someone who sounds like they speak an indigenous language, they'll be like, my dad's not shy. He'll be like, "Oh, where are you from? What language do you speak?" And they'll be like, "Oh, I speak Mam," which is, oh, it's a Mayan language. Or they'll be, "I speak Quiche." And actually, at my dad's work, because he works in a factory, growing up, I heard indigenous languages all around me, and very different languages. I've heard Otomi growing up, Zapotec, Chinanteco. He'd have all sorts of native indigenous people working alongside him in the local factories in Los Angeles. It's one of the hot spots actually. Um, but yeah, my parents are pretty more or less supportive. I went.
Yeah, that's great that they were. I'm really glad to hear that. Um, Speaking of indigenous people, and you're referring to factories, I think you had a video about indigenous farmers as well on your YouTube channel. That was
That's
kind of,
right.
yeah. Do you mind maybe discussing what maybe that was about, if it's
Sure
okay?
thing. Yeah, so many people wouldn't realize it. So if you there's some maps that look at statistics. Like if you see what's the largest indigenous language spoken in New Mexico, obviously that's Navajo. What's the largest indigenous language spoken in Arizona? Obviously that's Navajo. And what's the largest indigenous language spoken in California? Well, Navajo's not from California, but if you're restricting your words to only north of the border, then Navajo's is largest with a few thousand native speakers that live here in California, Los Angeles, and east of Los Angeles as well. But if you consider indigenous to mean North American indigenous, which includes Mexico, and right, if we're looking at the continent, then Mixtec is probably the largest indigenous language spoken in California. We're talking about tens of thousands of speakers. Um, it's not a small number by any measure here in California, and so there's a huge community in California, Mexico's California. So Baja California del Sur and del Norte. So there's farms out there where they work. San Diego, which is a continuation of that region, has a large Mixtec population, but the biggest one is the whole Central Valley of California. And so the Central Valley just has so many Mixtec speakers that these are communities where there's still people who don't speak much Spanish. And so the people there have worked with American nonprofit organization structures to create a nonprofit called MICOP, Mixteco Indigenous Community Organizing Project. And so they worked with American translators to get their languages recognized by the local government institutions, schools. The consulate knows about them and works together with them as well. And so they're working to get services for people who need services. So if someone is injured, like in the hospital, and they only speak Mixteco, and this is a common enough thing where they need to have translators, then they have to find an interpreter for them. Um, and so Um, so Miko is now it's a native Mixtec run organization, and they've created an indigenous radio. And so on Sundays, you can, if you're driving by the Central Valley of California, and you turn on the radio, you can hear La Hora Mixteca, where they have the radio mostly in Mixteco, and then it'll translate a little bit to Spanish. And that's for the local people who speak a lot of Mixteco. And I'm starting to see now an influencer who's a Mixtec person. Um, and so yeah, I got to have an interview. I've known them from years previously to that, actually, for different for different reasons. I've just come into contact with different people who are running language or indigenous rights movements. So I've just thought it was a good idea to have an interview, and so you guys can check out that interview and see all the things, all the progress that they've made, and all the problems that they're dealing with.
Oh, it's amazing. In discussion with Mayan languages, especially Quiche. I read a book. It was about a year ago, and it focused on the struggles of the internal wars in Guatemala, right, where a lot of indigenous people suffered, under dictators.
Hmm.
So it was there's some chapters that were hard to read, but it's great that there is, like you said, a radio station set up, and our channel, and then I think just the fact that there's a good population of Mayan speakers here, in the U.S. and in California. Um, So it's really nice to see, I think. So thanks for sharing that, Jan.
Yeah.
Um, to kind of go back a little bit to what you were saying was that when you kind of started things in I think California, you had gotten up to about 50 people that wanted to learn. That's right,
Hmm.
correct?
Yeah.
So were you pretty surprised, I think? I mean, how did you feel, I guess? Like it was like, wow, like this many people really want to, listen and learn from me. I'm sure it was really great, right?
Yeah. I mean, it just confirmed what I already kind of felt, which is that there's a huge amount of people, especially in Los Angeles, being a large Mexican and Central American region uh, with a lot of population. There's just a huge interest to learn indigenous languages, but yet the access to them is severely missing. And so people want something authentic, and we've there's been a kind of plague in the past since for the past probably 80 years, with a lot of people who promote themselves as elders who are not really elders except for age, for being old in age. And they've gone around spewing things kind of unchecked for the longest time, because there's this huge a lot of people want to know indigenous wisdom or language or information. And so but there's no one around to get that information from. So you have this want and a need, and the need's not being met, so people jump in to boost their egos and establish a name for themselves and just make up the silliest things, really the silliest things that you can imagine, like things that are obviously lies. So yeah, seeing 50 people reminded me just how much there's a big need from people to get access to these resources. Made me very happy. Curious to see who's going to come back, who's going to stay, because then we turned that 1 day workshop into a class that's still going on until today. And so we've gone through all these waves, like COVID times and closures and periods where we have less students and periods where we have an abundance of students, to the extent that we have like 3 classes going on at the same time in different corners of a small ballroom, for example. Um, and just very excited that there's that much interest in, for people, even if they just come for 1 day just to experience the language, then they got that day to experience a language, an opportunity that you won't get anywhere else, really.
Wow, yeah, that's amazing, Jan. That you really have a lot of people that are interested, that have been so thankful for all that you've done in assisting them, helping them. I think it's always interesting to see because I'm assuming, or maybe I'm wrong. Maybe a lot of the students that came in to want to learn from you were of either Mexican or native descent. But I think I saw one video where it looked like I don't know if it was a woman that maybe that was of European or Eurasian or somewhere not from the US that really wanted to learn. So have you've got people from around the world that have really wanted to take in what you've been teaching?
Yeah, yeah, you'd be surprised. I help out people anyone who's interested in learning. I don't care who it is, because anyone who's speaking the language is contributing to the language, right? Anyone who's speaking the language is adding to the language, is being part of that language. It's like a little bubble. Language is like a small bubble, and within that bubble is all the communication that's happening within that language. And adding more people to that bubble just makes it bigger, makes it expand. And then those people could turn into teachers themselves. And so I've never, yeah, it doesn't matter who learns it. One of our students, Rebecca, she's of European descent, but she learned Spanish fluently to the point where she can correct my grammar at times. She was a Spanish teacher for years in the public school system, and she learned Nahuatl, and she learned it very well. Um, and to the extent that she's gone to the indigenous village more times than I have probably now in the last few years, because she's at the age where she can travel more, and I'm at the age where I have to work more. Um, and she's well received. She has nicknames in the town, and people love engaging with her, and she's very friendly. And she's not there looking for to interview someone for their wisdom or anything. She just likes participating in the culture and being around in the culture, as it happens everywhere in the world, right? There's there's hundreds of thousands of Americans that live in Tokyo, well, in, let's say in Japan or abroad in general, right? That go out for university or teaching English and just like to be in that environment where another language is being spoken, where there's another culture being spoken, because you're learning from that culture and you're experiencing that culture um, and contributing in a sense by being in it. And that's part of why I focus so much on language, as part of the identity connection of reconnecting with our roots. Because to me, language is such an integral part to understanding and connecting with being indigenous. And so many people will spend their whole online lives just arguing about, are we indigenous or not, kind of thing, or the trolls, the people who are trolls and all that kind of stuff. Um, but then not necessarily use that energy to like to be constructive of something, like besides just arguing about labels, just by just speak the language, because then you're in that culture, right? It doesn't matter if you're 10% or 20% or 50% indigenous or 80%, right? Or then it's not a question of your percentage as much as you're being involved actively as a active participant of that language, and you're feeling that language out. um, and you're understanding the worldview without having it to be explained to you, right? You're getting the references without it having to be explained to you. So I felt like that was just the most natural way to get involved, to get in touch with that part of my ancestry. So that's a little segue about why I get so, about why it's so important to me, and why I've chosen language to kind of be my thing. Because there's many ways to get involved, right? Some people, it's by writing books and sharing information, and that's great. And some people, it's by um, by doing danza azteca and creating a community of people that might not speak the language fluently yet at this time, but do like ceremony or things like that. So everyone has their own journey, so, or their own path, or their own way to contribute. And yeah, and this is one way I get involved with it.
Yeah, I think that's great because, there's a lot of people that I think do want to connect to their ancestry, their roots in some way, but maybe sometimes it's hard because they're not anywhere near an indigenous community or indigenous speakers of Nahuatl or any Mayan languages or languages in Peru, obviously aside from Spanish. So yeah, I think that it's good for people that are really interested and curious to, if you're far away from native communities or from maybe reservations or anywhere, any communities at all, I think it's important to try to, help in some way, right? Rather if that's like supporting really important causes online, or learning a language as well, like Nahuatl from your channel. So learning, just taking the time to really learn about the history of maybe where you came from, or if you're not, native at all, just trying to listen and see what you can do. Because I think that well, I don't think, I know there's still a lot of problems, I think, in the world and specifically in the Americas, where unfortunately a lot of people from indigenous communities are really mistreated, or have their homes or their environments destroyed. So I think that it's good that people that live here in the US can provide some sort of meaningful contribution. Um, I think that's what it's all about, I would say. So,
Yeah, and there's not
yeah,
many content. There's a lot of space to be improved for making that connection across that border, because that little line there, physical and sometimes not physical, is done so much to keep away communication and building across communities. Um, and you might have heard like these old projects that started with creating sister cities, and how people use that as a way to get involved with making a direct physical connection with another community. And people used to use that with help out communities that needed, like, let's say, a trash can, like a trash removal system, like a trash truck, for example. And people from this side would communicate with a town that they would have links with, and directly have that kind of activism where they spoke to people and saw what are their actual needs as a community, and how can we help from this side of the border. We have some resources, but you guys also have some resources too. And so people would work together to help out with that need. And when it comes to indigenous communities, most people in the United States don't really know much that they exist, even in Mexico. Don't know that there's like almost 10 million speakers of indigenous languages, right? They don't have labels like reservations. It's in Mexico. It's an ethnicity, basically. You're just a number, right? But there's no recognition in any way, and it wasn't needed in the past, because that would have been like going to the Philippines and registering everyone who was native Filipino. Well, that was 95% of the population was native Filipino, so there was it didn't make sense, right? So in the early colonial period, it was very similar to that as well in Mexico. So um, so yeah, there's a whole tangent I can get involved with there, but that cross cultural, cross border link uh, definitely definitely needs to be established a lot more, because that's where you find a lot of the elders. You'll find elders in the Huasteca who still speak only Nahuatl and do the indigenous ceremonies and go on top of the hills to do the rites and small animal sacrifice and asking the spirits for the rain. That's where you find a whole nother society and world that lives down there. Um, and you'll find the elders who have this knowledge about corn and how to grow it and the different kinds of plants and how they're and what they're used for. Um, and different kinds of birds and what they tell you, and there's just so much involved in the knowledge that you see down there. And yeah, if we could make more connections, it'd be much better for everybody.
I agree. I think as technology progresses over time, I think we will be able to make better connections. I think, yeah, definitely. Um, so again, I appreciate you bringing that up, Jan. I know we kind of want to move through the script and what and keep time going. I think one question I did have for you would be just would you have any recommendations, I guess, for first time learners of Nahuatl, or do you usually not recommendations, or I guess just like things to be aware of as you're learning this very important language?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of things come up as we're working with the language, it's more specific things, but in general, there's a very small hurdle to get through when you're learning Nahuatl, and that's just training your ears to be familiarized with the whole system, training yourself to be familiarized with how words are going to look like and what to expect with the sounds. I remember when I first saw Nahuatl written, I was like, I have no idea how I'm supposed to pronounce this. Um, Once I was in class with people, it became pretty. I got over that hurdle pretty fast. That's what that first summer was for me. But for someone who's a self learner, you might not have that opportunity to go to an in-person class, right? Across the whole country, there's very few, if in any place. Um, so I would recommend to look at the resources, but not get overburdened by it too fast, and establish goals about how much to keep track of yourself and keep yourself committed to get over that hurdle. So don't give up at the very beginning. You have to power through it, and don't expect to do it all in one weekend. It's not like just reading a book where you sit down for a long time and then you get it. So you have to learn like a few concepts at a time, let your mind kind of rest on that, and then come back to it and build on it one day after the other. So, I've tried to create resources out there. My channel's free. I have a small book that I produce as well too, for learning the language, the Learn Nahuatl language of the Aztecs and modern Nahuatl. It's a bit of a glare.
Let me focus in on that really quick. Okay, cool.
Yeah, this one's on Amazon. You can just put Learn Nahuatl and it comes up. And this is a self-study book, so it's supposed to be easy to kind of it's got like lots of exercises inside of it. So there's exercises and then the answers in the back.
Ah,
So you can
okay.
kind of go through it piece by piece. But that's just one resource. So some people learn a lot from just that, using that, but some people need more than just that. So there's also the channel that I have. My friend Kui over at Speak Nahuatl has online classes that he has. And if you can speak Spanish, then there's a lot of options on Facebook too. So you want to join a class where you can hear the language at least, at the very least. If not, you might be able to get pretty far from the videos, because on the comments I'll ask people, okay, try to say this. We did this lesson. Now that you know how to do this, try and say this sentence. Put your answers at the bottom, and then I'll see people's responses and see, okay, people are getting it. People are getting it. I can see where they make mistakes, but they're showing a lot of progress, and they're showing how much they do know with those mistakes. Because I'm like, yeah, it's just how grammar is. So a small hurdle to get through, but keep at it. Stay dedicated to it.
I appreciate you sharing that, Jan. It's really helpful, I think, for people that, are first time learners, or maybe people right now that are listening that would be interested in your classes and just learning Nahuatl. So thank you. Um, I think a couple, or maybe one or two people had a question.
Yeah,
I would like to save questions for the end, audience, but we can maybe look at one really quick here that I
sure
think
thing.
someone had. Maybe it's here. And then, do you believe in paranormal stuff from Native American indigenous cultures? This is a Halloween thing.
Gotcha.
Right.
um, it, I, you can. I mean, I'm kind of more of like myself, kind of like a I don't believe anything kind of thing when it comes down to like my own beliefs and my own like religious uh kind of things, whether it's from any culture around the world. That's just me. But you do have to say that that's not to say that there's stuff out there that we don't understand that well, and it's things out there that are more of a feel kind of thing. Certain things that you can just feel, and certain energies that you can just kind of feel, um, that are kind of beyond. But in general, I'm generally speaking, I'm kind of more of like a I won't believe something until I have evidence for it kind of thing. But I don't exclude the possibility of things being out there.
Thanks for answering that, Jan. I think it was a good response.
Mhm.
I think I don't know. It was a question directed maybe for the both of us or specifically you, but I guess me, like, I would say that there's a lot that I don't think we understand yet. So kind of similar to what you said, Jan, about the world and how it works. I don't know
Yeah,
what
there's
this
there's
energy
definitely
will.
evidence. There's definitely evidence of like beyond paranormal. There is some evidence of early anthropologists who would go to native communities like deep in the Amazon and things like that would see ceremonies being done on people who were clearly like dying, but something about the energy in having a group of people supporting you and doing songs for you that had this deep emotional had enough power in them to kind of help a lot of people get through that sickness. There's like that power of a community physically there supporting you with some kind of with the ritual. These are scientists who anthropologists who have recorded seeing that in the past, seeing the power of these kinds of things. So maybe it's a psychological kind of neat thing where we are social creatures, right? We're humans, so there could be some kind of power in that. So definitely, yeah, there's room, right?
Yeah. Thanks for answering that, Jan. Um, I think someone else had another question, but I think we can kind of. I've never heard of this show or movie, so I'm not sure if you have
Yeah,
either.
that's a new
So,
movie. That's a
oh,
new movie. It just came out this year or last year, but I have not had time to see it. Yeah, 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 I haven't had time to see it. Yeah,
is that the one with
uh,
the famous actor?
yes, yeah,
Okay, okay,
it
that
it
one.
is that
All
one.
right, yeah, that one. Yeah, I haven't seen it either, but it looks, yeah, like it could be good.
Yeah, it is on my list of things to watch though. I just haven't gotten time with it.
Cool, nice. Um, but yeah, I think as we move on to like just learning about your YouTube channel, Jan, I think we kind of answered the question of like what made you want to start it, right? It kind of goes hand in hand with kind
Hmm.
of what you were explaining about earlier. So I guess like what would you say is like the highlights or the things that really made you continue to still pursue making content, making videos, right? Um, and
Hmm.
maybe were there any were there any like obstacles? I mean, I know aside from like our family life and whatnot, certainly that takes up time. But if you ever had any other things that like made it hard or just maybe had you rethink things like when you were in the middle of making videos? I'm just curious, yeah, if you
Hmm.
could share that.
I mean, part of what why I keep going is when I do keep going is I just had these ideas. I just have I'm like we haven't done this and now what? Because it's such a fresh area. There's so much that hasn't been created, right? There's very few people who've made skits or like let's say YouTube skits in Nahuatl. They do exist, but I just think of pop songs in Nahuatl. There's only one artist that's tried to do it, and well, the problem is when you do there's not much of an audience for indigenous made media. Um, so when you do make something indigenous, you kind of think a lot of people are going to be interested in it, and sometimes there is a lot of interest, and sometimes there's not that much interest in things. But I just get these ideas, and I realize well, no one's done this yet, so let's do it. So there's no one's made a, indigenous comic, right? So I'm like, okay, well then let's do it. I mean, they people have made indigenous comics, but I mean like a Nahuatl based comic. Since then, there's been like one mini comic that has been made that's in Nahuatl. Um, yeah, but that's another project I've worked on. But just the fact that there's so much out there that needs to be done is why it's kind of what motivates me to make more stuff. And I still have more ideas. I don't run out of ideas. So that's my problem. That's like how my attention is. Uh I I make one thing and then I'm like, well, I have three more things I need want to make now. I still want to make like a total physical response kind of video where you're immersed in that throughout the whole video. I've done that one time for a 1 hour video with good editing with a group, but it took a lot of hours to create just one. So projects. If I were rich and millionaire, then I would just do those projects all day long, kind of thing. But the reality of where we're at, the world is everything's expensive, and it's gotten even more expensive, not less. So I thought I'd be okay by now, and I'm okay, but not as much. Uh, you uh, Not as much as I'd like to be yet. So, um, so yeah, but not many obstacles, I would say.
That's great. I think I can reflect on that too. Yeah, in terms of like, yeah, we have these great ideas, but having the time and then,
Hmm. Yeah, time and
um,
money, right?
yeah, seems to
And I think
affect a
that's
lot
why
of things.
many go to like off like creating fundraisers for their events or creating those GoFundMe kind of pages, kind of thing, which can take you pretty far, but it's not always enough.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with you, John. But going back to your comics, I think that's really great that you are working on this, and this is actually what kind of started me reaching out to you. I had a friend, actually, she's on here now. Sylvia kind of showed me the video um, of you working on your indigenous comics, and I was like, wow, that would be great to like really bring to my audience if they were interested, right? And then, of course, like, and for those that are watching right now, you were on a video of mine, I think a year and a half ago, or quite some time ago. So it is nice to have you back on after some
Yeah,
time has passed. Um, but yeah, so I guess I was going to ask, did you have any, and I should have asked this before we started, did you have any maybe pictures or artwork that you wanted to share at all?
yeah. And
Um,
in fact, the Nahuatl. So what this comic is, anyone who doesn't know, I had this idea to create indigenous comics for the youth who speak Nahuatl, and any indigenous language, right? So the only book that's really been translated to indigenous languages is, if you can guess, it's the Bible. And they've done a really good job of getting to every little community that they can, every different variety of each language. So it's not an exaggeration to say there's at least 100 different indigenous language Bibles within just Mexico, because it's 64 languages, but each language has different variations. So they've gone to the different varieties too. So there's no way I can beat that, because they fund their translators and linguists through SIL, Summer Institute of Linguistics, which is funded through like a Christian church. So they have they have a budget of millions of dollars. The Mexican government has an organization called INALI, which supports indigenous languages, but I think their budget got cut in half, and they were already producing just a few things here and there, and now they're going to be producing even less, and they're caught up in bureaucracy right now about how to spell. Anyway, so I wanted to create a comic. I want to create literature and books in indigenous languages. But a lot of people in Mexico love like Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z and Naruto, and so that Goku is almost like a second Jesus in Mexico, right? So like it's like a joke, but it's kind of true. But I can't create those translations in Nahuatl. I created a dubbed version with friends of one episode of Dragon Ball, but um, one episode of Dragon Ball, but I couldn't upload it to YouTube because my channel almost got deleted when I did because it's considered copyrighted. Even though it's for educational purposes, even though, and you can still see other people's posting things on there, right? But I don't know how to get around that. So I had to upload it to this obscure website where no one will ever see it, kind of thing. And so I was like, okay, no, we have to create our own materials that we give ourselves the right to make copies of and translate. So I couldn't just take a comic and translate it. I had to create a comic from scratch, and now I can translate it. So far, I've published it in English to Nahuatl, and you can get this on Amazon already. English to Nahuatl. Well, actually, it's Nahuatl to English, I should say. Another version that's Nahuatl to Spanish. I have one that's out for Tzotzil to Spanish. Tzotzil is a Mayan language that the EZLN spoke or speaks still. The indigenous army that took over cities in the state of Chiapas back in 1994 to protest NAFTA. They're this huge, very leftist kind of indigenous movement. And now their general region is a pretty famous hotspot for tourism and Chamula area. So that's the Tzotzil language, an indigenous Mayan language in Chiapas. We've got that translation. I've got another one for the Raramuri language, also known as the Tarahumara. These are the famous long distance runners of northern Mexico, of Chihuahua, the people who run marathons of 100 miles. It's not an exaggeration, it's literally 100 miles for fun and for ceremony and for sport and for betting and wagering and all these kinds of different purposes. Um, it's gotten famous lately because of the book Born to Run, which is about long distance running and how they run in sandals and run through up the canyons and down the canyons. So I've got to translate in the Raramuri language. I've got to translate in the Yucatec language. So you might know that from like Apocalipto. That's the language spoken there. Another Mayan language, and one that's very easy to do in Mayan glyphs. So I haven't published that one yet because I'm working on the last 3 pages to put in indigenous Mayan glyphs for the first time ever into a comic, into any published material, really. You haven't seen Mayan glyphs out there for the past 500 years. So it's super unique. The I think Yucatec were the last Mayan people to actually know how to write the Mayan alphabet, the Mayan script, not an alphabet, the Mayan script with the hieroglyphs. And the last thing that they were writing was "I don't want to write it" because they were doing under pressure from the Spaniards to write down the book. And so that memory was lost and wiped out from Mayan people's collective knowledge for the next 300 years until linguists started to learn how it works, and they realized that it is an actual script that actually records language, and then now a lot of it is deciphered. So enough of it is deciphered where I'm doing Mayan glyphs in a Yucatec translation, but I'm only doing 1 chapter because the whole book would take up like a whole year for me to do. But I can show right here. This is the English, the one that has English, Anawak Itlillo, Ink of Anawak, and it's about 5 mini stories, different. So it's different stories, not one big continuous stories. And then so that's me, and then my editor Victoriano Teposteco. He's one of my indigenous teachers from back in the day, and one of the biggest activists in all of Mexico for the Nahuatl language. So we're excited to bring this story. So we've got a whole bunch of different stories. I don't know how much time we have to get into every story, but for example,
Beautiful.
this story is about a midwife who has that kind of dark energy. So this particular belief of dark energies comes from the state of Guerrero, and the Mixtec region too, where there's a big belief about how children and babies are very sensitive to having their energy kind of being taken by what you would call like witches, but let's say, by like spiritual people who have that dark energy and who know different kinds of enchantments, who know how those kind of like negative prayers. So this lady has that negative energy. Whenever she encounters kids, they come across this negative energy. But she kind of is at odds. She's not sure what to do when she encounters a pregnant lady, right? Because this is very dangerous for her to be touching or near a pregnant lady because she has that negative energy. And so she can help this lady, but by helping her, she's going to be touching her and making that contact that could endanger the baby's life. And so she's got her own kind of um, internal conflict, that you could say. At the same time, the artwork for this one is taken from indigenous Mixtec codices. So these are the typical clothing that you would see in Mixtec codices from like the year 1500. So like the when Mixtec empires were huge and they had like Mixtec kingdoms in Oaxaca. And so this is taking place around that time. So this would be so they all of the stories have a time and place, and their clothing is kind of based on a certain region. So that's the first story. I have another one where the conflict is about love and war kind of thing. So the chief. So sometimes indigenous women were the rulers, the local rulers or authority of the town. Like in Tonalá, Jalisco, it was a female ruler called Siwapili. So, um, but a very male-centric empire like the Aztec Empire only usually had men at the very top, and this is because they're a very warrior kind of aggressive society. And so here you have a small army from the Aztec army that encounters a queen from a small village or from a small town. And so she's kind of at odds between her town and this guy um, that she has that she's working out an arrangement with. So you can kind of see that one. So this story is taking place more in central Mexico kind of region. So we got different stories, different time periods, different kind of problems, but they're mostly indigenous stories. So a lot of people, when they tell indigenous stories, it's about fighting against colonizers or going against Spanish or being repressed by Spanish. But here it's indigenous stories that are where the conflict is with other villages or with other people, like the normal conflicts that you can have as a people without it always being about outsiders. And yeah, and we have another one about a Mayan scribe, who's learning about a young boy who wants to become a Mayan scribe and be able to write and read in the Mayan script. His problem, though, is that he might have a form of a reading disability. Like he might have trouble with reading more than other people, right? Like dyslexia, for example, but in the version that you have for Maya. So he's got to kind of overcome that in his story. So, Kachikel I saw. So Lautza watch. I took one month of Kachikel because I was in Guatemala for a summer. But yeah, so what you will see, however, and I do have to give this caveat, is that I'm just like in a Japanese manga is going to be written primarily in Japanese, especially if it's rare. I know for the common ones, they will have them translated and dubbed. But just like just like how there's a difference between hearing a dubbed version and hearing just the one with the subtitles at the bottom. When you hear the subtitles at the bottom, you can actually hear the native Japanese as the story was meant to be spoken. And so this one is bilingual, Nahuatl and English, but English is not at the forefront. It is focused on Nahuatl. And so if you want to get that experience, of course, I encourage you to study Nahuatl so you can get a feel for it. But don't feel like you won't be able to understand the Nahuatl or the story, because it does have English at the bottom. You just have to squint your eyes just a little bit more to be able to read it. But it is in both languages. So yeah, we got a bunch of stories. I want to produce Zapotec and Mixtec as well. But beyond that, I'm not sure how much farther I'll go because it's very expensive to create these books because I have to create artists, I have to pay translators, and I have to do a lot of editing myself. And I'm not gonna make any. I'm probably not gonna make my money back from this, to be honest, with all the money I've spent on it. So it's more of a loss. So this is why a lot of people wouldn't create something like this because creating content for indigenous languages is not capitalistically speaking financially suitable or sustainable. Um, and I have a distribution problem with getting this to the indigenous communities themselves because they don't have internet, they don't have Amazon in a lot of these towns. Um, but you guys can support it by getting some copies and gifting them out because they do have one that has an English option. And if I have enough of an interest, I would think about creating like an English only version. But for now, I just have that version that's bilingual.
I think that's great what you're doing, Jan. Especially for young kids too that really don't see much representation at all, or not very much. So thanks for what you're doing, Jan. I think that's amazing. Wow. I think it's one point that you kind of talked about. I think which is really great is that with a lot of comics and other artwork, maybe it is focused more so on like the native versus the Spaniard, right, or the conquistador, where what this is more of a focus on is on like the life of native people in their
Hmm.
everyday lifestyle, right?
Hmm.
Not that I'm saying that other comics and whatnot it isn't like bad or anything like that. I think that's great too. But I think this focus is and what you're doing is really good. I think it gives people different perspective of life through comics such as yours. So
Yeah,
that's really great.
that's exactly it. That's what I'm aiming for.
Yeah, that's great, Jan. So everyone that's in the audience, please, if you're interested, check out his channel, and also I think your GoFundMe link is in the bio as well, and you can also check out his video about his comics too. Um, so yeah, Jan, I think on the next part of the script it was going to be about classes, but we pretty much talked about that already.
Sure.
Um, so I guess before we get into the closing part and then just opening up for questions, um, would you say you're pretty confident about the future of how Nawat is being taught and how more people can benefit? Do you think as technology progresses, as I said, that this can really be opened up to more people who want to learn? Or
Oh yeah.
do you?
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. For people who are learning it as a second language, things are just getting better and better every single day. There's so much more material being made by the hard collective work of everyone who's working to promote the language. And we all know this is not a hobby that makes you really any money. Um, but people who just have that sheer interest and that will. The flip side to that, though, where I'm not so confident, is with the actual native communities, because now that the kids have access to, well, not all communities have access to internet, as I was saying, but some kids are already getting access to like phones and things like that. They care more about English than they do about Nahuatl. So already there's lots of town, like actually all towns, as far as I know, or I would say about 9 out of 10 towns, the young kids already don't know enough of the language to be able to pass it on or don't speak it, or there's just so much embarrassment that the kids as a collective are not speaking it. So there's a gap already. That gap has already been created. That gap exists, and those kids are under 10 years old right now, but as time progresses, those kids will be the last elders who heard Nahuatl spoken. And that's just the trajectory of where life is going, with the fact that capitalism pushes kids to leave their community every single year because you can't, it's not sustainable to live off of farming when America subsidizes all of its corn, and it's cheaper to buy American corn because taxpayers subsidize it. And so what edge do indigenous farmers have of traditional agriculture and rare forms of growing rare forms of corn, if people don't value it, not enough to outcompete American corn or American crops in general. Um, so the reality is most people have to leave, go to the city, learn Spanish, come back, and use that money to live a nice rest of your life, or never come back and just integrate into the city. And and so when I was there in 2009 in the small villages, I the kids were playing soccer in Nahuatl. It was very much alive. But I'm not sure if the generation right now has that same uh, dynamic. And so it's an uphill battle, and so that's the reality. That I hope people do understand. Like, this language might it's not threatened right now, but the future of it is very much threatened.
Do you feel confident that if we're discussing Mexico, that the government there could better or will find ways to make Nahuatl more, I guess, more so protected, but also, no, you
Probably
feel
no,
that you
no,
don't think so. Yeah.
no. There's just no budget. There's no structure. The most that's happening is from a few teachers who are trying to create bilingual programs. That's the big highlight, and where people who are very much activists are trying to promote. But there's just so many problems that it's a whole conversation. A lot of times there's a policy of sending people to the wrong Indigenous community, even if they do speak Indigenous language, so that they don't actually get to speak or teach a native language to anyone, because they'll be sent to the wrong, like a Nahuatl speaker would be sent to a Mixtec town or something like that could happen. Um, I have seen Mixtec towns where the teachers are bilingual and teaching the kids the local language, but you got to remember, teaching local language sometimes just means teaching them like how to say the animal names or how to say the Pledge of Allegiance. Well, not the Pledge of Allegiance over there, but like us, the national anthem or a poem. And but that's about it. There's you're not no almost no one is actually moving towards teaching education in the native language. So I don't see the government doing, and whether we've had like neoliberal presidents or more or somewhat more leftist president like right now, the dialogue and discourse is there, and he's creating a now at university or like Indigenous university where they're going to teach how to train people to be language teachers, but that's very top oriented. It's not from the bottom up. It's very top, like, to get to for a native speaker to get to that, to get far enough through the educational system to get to a master's program where they're going to learn how to become Indigenous language teachers. It's a lot of steps to take. So we're talking about something that's going to affect like 1% of native speakers, as opposed to a policy of supporting bilingual education, because the government does permit it, but then they say, well, you guys have to create your own budget for it. There's no extra budget for an Indigenous language thing. So yeah, I don't expect much from the government on no matter who's in charge.
Yeah. I think serious changes would have to happen if we
Mm-hmm.
wanted to be more competent in the government over there, certainly. Um, so yeah, thanks for sharing that, Jan. But yeah, I know, not on a time crunch, but wanted to get this done, this video, finished off, so we could have time to ourselves in our lives. But I would like to maybe just hold the video for just maybe 5 minutes for anyone that has any questions for Jan. Or myself, and I'm happy to answer them. I think one person asked here if I asked you about your backstory and what made you like want to connect to Indigenous community, and you kind of explained your backstory, I think, in the beginning. Um, was
Yeah.
there anything else you wanted to add to that? Um,
Basically,
yeah,
the Indigenous classes that I took to learn Nahuatl were held in Zacatecas. The variety was Huasteca Nahuatl, and we didn't learn Nahuatl in the Huasteca region because the Nahuatl uh, students who were also teachers, they go to the university in a different city, so the city of Zacatecas, to go study there. It's about like a 10-hour or 11-hour bus drive from the Huasteca. Um, and so that's where I met them and was learned from them. Had like 6 or 7 different native teachers, and they were all from the same region of the Huasteca. Just like not a coincidence, but yeah, they're all from that region. So it's in the Chicontepec region of Veracruz, And when I was younger, I used to go to that community a lot more. I went at least 3 different times, enough so people recognized me. So when I came back, people would remember me and have stories about me, um, and where I could joke around with people. And people had a really very pleasant, I guess you could say, vibe. You could say, very welcoming. Um, the people there, as soon as they see you, they would treat you like one of their own. Especially if they see you speaking Nahuatl, they would go out of their way and say, "Oh, you're speaking Nahuatl. Thank you for speaking our language here." Because they could see physically, I don't look like people from there. Because different people in different parts of Mexico have different facial features, and they can tell very easily when you're not from there too. But yeah, that's my biggest connection. Incidentally, I was also involved with a little bit with the Mixtec community of Puebla. It's a community that has only 3,000 people left who speak Mixtec. Um, but that's a whole nother story. I got involved with that small community for a while too, and so I created a couple of materials out there, and people are grateful for some of the videos I made on a different channel, for Mixtec. But again, time wise, it's been limiting.
Thank you for answering that, Jan. I think someone asked here where you can buy the book. And
I got them on Amazon. It's just because it's easier for me as someone selling them. So you can look up Ink of Anawak, Anawak spelled with a W, or the Nahuatl title Anawak Itlillo. So Anawak, Anawak,
you just singled it.
Itlillo, Itlillo. So Anawak Itlillo. So the ink of Anawak. Ink because we're using ink to create these black and white images. Kind of like indigenous scribes have used ink in the past. Like Mayan scribes used ink to write out their ink. And Anawak being that region of Mesoamerica. So this one's on Amazon. And then the Learn Nahuatl book. So that one is also on Amazon as well. Learn Nahuatl. I have like a small picture dictionary on there as well. But if you guys want, I can share with you the actual link. And if there's comments on this, I could comment on it later.
Sure. Thank you so much, Jan, for sharing that. Let me see here. Anyone else? Any other questions? Someone asked what your favorite song is, if you have one.
In Nahuatl?
Yeah, I think he asked it in what, but I think that
Okay. I do
good.
have a favorite song, but they don't really have names. But this one does have a name, but it has like over 20 different variations because different towns play the same song, but in different ways. It's called Xochipitzawak, Flor Menudita, which means skinny flower. And so it's traditionally a wedding song, but this variety that I play is more of like I get it's more of like a love song kind of thing in this version, and it's very somber. It feels very, I don't know, it just has a very nice feeling to it. Yeah, I'll have it in my Google Drive somewhere, and it's 8 minutes of violin music because they play traditional violin over there, but the last 2 minutes is a spoken song part. Um, Yeah, that's one of my favorite ones. You won't find it online. I'd have to share it with you because there's a lot of Nahuatl songs that just haven't made it online. I've made one playlist for it, or two playlists on my Canal Nahuatl page. I think it was a Spanish one, um, with some Nahuatl music. But yeah, it's very different from like North American indigenous, where it's more like drums. But in Mexico, people since European music arrived there in the 1500s, towns flipped over like very quick to learn without repression. Like the Spanish were writing, "Oh, like we don't even live in this town, and yet people here are already playing violins already, like in drum and guitars. Like people just love that string music." So there's also a little bit of flute music too, but it's more that got preserved more ceremonially, like for ceremonies. It's a small flute and a little drum that gets played at the same time, and that's for yeah, that's it's that one's more for ceremony though.
Great. Thank you, Jan. I know very little about Nod music, so or
No worries.
songs, so yeah,
That's the
that
right song, the Lila Flores, but not, but she's I mean she's not a native speaker, but yeah, she's kind of like putting that song out there. So maybe she's got one version of it, but she's probably gonna adapt it a little bit to like a more mainstream audience. So it's not like in the pure form per se.
Thank you, Jan. And then, all right, we can take one more question or two. Is there an app Jan would use to learn how it?
If you have Android, I created a tool for Nahuatl. And unfortunately it got a couple bad reviews because people thought it was going to be an app that taught you all of Nahuatl, but it's a really cool grammar tool. It's like a calculator that I created on Android. It's called Nahuatl Grammar. Um, and so that one teaches you the structure for how to conjugate. So with that one, you move these little, like turning these little wheels, and by turning the wheel, you get a different conjugation of the verb. So you could say like I swim and you swim and he swims. ¿Se comer pizza? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you, Jan. So yeah, everyone, I think we'll kind of pull off one question. Someone asked me about racism, and no, I don't think racism is good. But yeah, aside from that, yeah, maybe we can talk a minute or two after this is over and the podcast. But I'll go ahead and just drop the link anyway, in case anyone wants to join. I always try to hold off like little after parties once the podcast is over. So yeah, thank you, audience. Thank you, Jan, for wanting to take the time to do this. I really
My
appreciate
pleasure.
it. Thanks for all you do.
Yeah.
And yeah, just keep on doing what you're doing, and you've really helped a lot of people out there, I'm sure. So
Las Camate.
thank you. So yeah, everybody, again, thanks for your time and checking out the channel, and we'll certainly talk again. And if you like this, please like the video and please share it with your friends who are interested. More importantly, share it with people who want to learn Nahuatl, who are interested in Jan and his channel. I have the links in the bio, so please follow those. It would be greatly appreciated. And of course, just share it with people who want to learn more, because not everyone is aware of this knowledge. Not everyone is aware of ways that they can learn Nahuatl, or maybe it's a little bit harder for them. So it's good to always share content. So yeah, thank you all. And I'm going to end the stream now.
Las Camate.
So, bye.